what's interesting is there hasn't really been a time in Bitcoin's history where had you bought it, you were not up 4 years later. But it is getting pretty close to one, right? I mean, you can see had you bought Bitcoin 3 years ago, or 4 years ago in April 2021, your ROI today would only be about 30% because you essentially bought at the top of the market. But I mean, if you look at others, like the 3-year ROI, it actually did dip below one a couple times throughout history already. So you have the running 1-year ROI that tends to bottom around 0.2. This was a metric we followed a lot back in 2022. As we said, a lot of times Bitcoin will bottom out around the time that the 1-year ROI is 0.2, meaning about an 80% drop in Bitcoin's price. That will also, typically usher in a major market cycle low.
For over a decade, Bitcoin has maintained an impressive track record. No investor who held for 4 years has ever lost money. But this remarkable streak is now being put to the ultimate test. Those who bought at the April 20th, 2021 peak are currently looking at modest 30% returns, a far cry from Bitcoin's typical explosive gains. This has many wondering, is Bitcoin's unstoppable momentum finally slowing down? Crypto analyst Benjamin Cowen points out that while Bitcoin's 3-year returns have dipped into negative territory before, the 4-year streak remains intact, though it's getting uncomfortably close to breaking. History shows Bitcoin tends to find its bottom when the 1-year return hits around 0.2, representing an 80% drop from peak prices. This pattern held true during the 2022 market crash, signaling cyclical lows. As Bitcoin continues testing these historical boundaries, the crypto community watches with bated breath. Will this just be another pause before Bitcoin's next spectacular rally, or are we witnessing the end of an era? The coming months could determine whether Bitcoin maintains its perfect 4-year record, or if even crypto's most reliable pattern has its limits. One thing's certain, in Bitcoin's volatile world, nothing is guaranteed forever. We will now bring you clips from Benjamin Cowen's explosive analysis to gain more insight. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, and enable notifications for additional in-depth content. Thanks for joining us again. Enjoy the video.
Well, anytime Bitcoin closes above either the 20-week SMA or the 21-week EMA, you could argue that it is worthy of a video, especially when you spend a little bit of time below those levels. Remember, what we talked about is that you really like to see Bitcoin stay above the 2024 high, which it has so far been able to do, which is a good thing to see. Now here, we've been in this situation before this cycle where we get Bitcoin just above that 20-week moving average. It happened right here back in 2023, got a little bit of a pullback, but ultimately held that 21-week EMA more or less on the weekly time frame. It also happened right here in July 2024 and in August 2024 and also in September 2024. And what you'll notice is that it wasn't until Bitcoin held support on that bull market support band that it was able to usher in new all-time highs. The other two attempts were failed, right? You can see that Bitcoin got above the bull market support band, but it did not hold it. And what I've always said is you need to see really 2 candles. So you get your first candle above it, and you really want to see 2 candles after that close above it, right? And you can see that in 2024, right? In July, we got 1, and then the second one was below it. And then in August, right, it got above it, but then the next week was right back down. But then here, you got above it, and then the next one was above it, and then the next one was above it, and then you went up. And we've said that many, many times, right? You don't just want to get one. You need to see it get up there, and then you need to see the follow through. And with the labor market release coming out this week, it's going to be a week full of labor market data. I wouldn't be that surprised to see, that 20-week SMA and or that 21-week EMA to be called into question before too long. So, ultimately, and I know there's people on both sides, right? Both sides. But this is the way I would say it. This is the way I would say it is that absolutely no one knows what's going to happen. And everyone, think about how many people were so confident right here that the low was in, right? And we're calling for new highs. And then we get up here and then it turns out the low wasn't in, and then they get a little bit quiet. If Bitcoin can close the next 2 weeks above the 20-week SMA, then it's pretty I would say it leans more optimistic, like it did right here. And right here, right? And here. But if we get a weekly close below the 21-week EMA, then my guess is that we get a new low, right? My guess is that we get a new low. So it's an if-then statement, right? If Bitcoin for the next 2 weeks stays above the 21-week EMA, then it's more favorable going into the summer. Now, a lot of times the summer isn't really that favorable for Bitcoin, but post-halving years can be somewhat different, right? I mean, if you actually go look at monthly returns for Bitcoin, look at 2017, right? I mean, the summer wasn't all that bad. I mean, May, Bitcoin went up 73%. And then in July and August, it also went up quite a bit. So it's not like every summer has to suck. It's just that most summers do. And it's possible this one could not be that great. We'll have to see. I mean, you can see that June of 2013, Bitcoin dropped 24%. And then, of course, and we know everyone, I'm sure here, a lot of people here remember what happened in 2021, where Bitcoin, basically the floor fell out of it in May of 2021. So, I'm not completely out of tune with that idea that, we could see that sort of that weakness return in the summer. But what I would argue is that what happens over the next couple of weeks kind of sets up the rest of the summer. Okay, so this is what I would say. I would say if Bitcoin drops back below the 21-week EMA over the next 2 weeks, then it would more likely favor what happened in 2019, where you get sort of this move above it, but then it's unable to hold it, and then it just goes right back down into a lower low, right? Now, the good news is that if it does go into a lower low, because Bitcoin has not even yet tested the 2024 high, there's a chance that could actually hold as support. Furthermore, if it copies 2017, it could still go below the 2024 high, right? The 2017 wick right there went actually below the 2016 high, and it still ushered in a right translated cycle. So I would argue you could even wick below the 2024 high and things still be okay. What you don't want to see on any lower low is a test of that trend line, right? A test of that trend line, in my opinion, would sort of, I think the writing would be on the wall at that point. Remember, even in a left translated cycle, you're always going to get a macro lower high, right? We said that. You likely would see one in the Q2 to Q3 timeframe. So that's what I'm arguing here, right? Is that if Bitcoin is unable to hold this over the next 2 weeks, kind of like what it did right here and right here, then it's more likely to usher in a lower low where we actually go back down and test the 2024 high, or maybe even slightly wick below it. In order to see something like that happen, you would likely need to see the S&P drop back down and retest this low, which is not a guarantee that has to happen. The only case that we follow that would suggest that could be a possibility is if you look at the S&P 500 divided by the money supply M2, and you notice that, hey, this is exactly where it got rejected at in 1998. It came down, set this low right there, bounced for 3 weeks, and then came down and set a slightly lower low. So if it were to do that, then certainly it could take Bitcoin back down to potentially retest that 2024 high. If Bitcoin is able to stay above the 20-week SMA and or 21-week EMA over the next 2 weeks, then it would lean towards this not being the most likely outcome of a lower low. So I think a lot of what happens over the summer is going to come down to what happens here on this move. Because a lot of times when you get a weekly close above the 20-week SMA, you'll know pretty quickly if it's a real breakout or a fake out, right? If it's a real breakout, you would expect Bitcoin to hold support on the 20-week moving average, right? Or the 21-week EMA, right? You would expect it to hold support. If it's a fake out, then it's going to pretty quickly go back down, right? It won't hold these levels for very long if it's a fake out. I would not expect it to just stay up here for months and months and months and months without putting in new all-time highs to then go put in a lower low, right? It's going to do one or the other, in my opinion, and that's why I say the next couple of weeks should be instrumental. And I would be playing it like this. If I see a weekly close below the 21-week EMA, I would assume the next likely move is a slightly lower low, right? It doesn't have to be that much lower, but it could just be sort of a slightly lower low, potentially down to just below that 2024 high. As I've said before, right? I mean, even the good news for the people that are worried about left translated cycles is that usually, even in left translated cycles, it's not obvious until Q4, because a lot of people aren't going to believe it until that time, because you're going to have a lot of people that are just going to assume it's a right translated cycle. And why shouldn't they? All prior cycles by Bitcoin have been right translated, so it seems that it's not like the worst thing to believe in, considering that all prior cycles have been right translated. And this is probably one of the reasons why it just keeps it going so long. So again, you need to have a strategy to play this stuff. For me, as I've said before, right? I mean, being Bitcoin heavy tends to be a lot better than being altcoin heavy, because altcoins are going to get destroyed no matter what, in my opinion. Even look at this. I mean, look at this. Bitcoin's above the 21-week EMA, or the 21-week EMA and the 20-week SMA. Guess where the altcoin market is, right? I mean, look where Total 2 is. Total 2, everything besides Bitcoin, basically. Look where it is. Not even at the 21-week EMA, right? I mean, that's how pathetic the altcoin market is. Can't even get to the 21-week EMA, despite the fact that Bitcoin is all the way above the 20-week SMA. Again, it goes to show you why Bitcoin has been the better play for those who care to listen. And I mean, also look at Bitcoin dominance. I mean, just one weekly green candle after another. It's like 8 in a row now. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I mean, look at that. 8 in a row. We're currently on the 9th one, potentially, of another green week for Bitcoin dominance. And I mean, it shows you. I mean, it shows you why, right? I mean, you look at Bitcoin USD, you're like, oh, it's above the 20-week SMA. And then you look at Total 2, and you're like, well, hell, it can't even be bothered to get up to the 21-week EMA, despite the fact that Bitcoin is all the way where it is.
Bitcoin is back above key moving averages, and history reveals that the 20-week SMA/21-week EMA battle is crucial in distinguishing real breakouts from false signals. With major economic data on the horizon, the next 14 days are critical. If Bitcoin holds above, a summer rally could be triggered. A drop below, however, may lead to a retest of the 2024 lows. As altcoins struggle, Bitcoin dominance reaches a 9-week streak, reaffirming Bitcoin's status as crypto's leading momentum play. This bull run is rewriting the rules, starting like 2016's rocket ride, but cooling into 2019's cautious grind. The key difference? The Fed's tight grip. While Bitcoin's 1-year ROI has slumped from 3.4x to near break-even, history hints at a comeback if policymakers blink. Critical support at negative 25% 90-day ROI holds the line, break it, and bears may pounce. With altcoins crumbling and Bitcoin dominance soaring, the king remains crypto's safest bet in this high-stakes waiting game.
We've spoken a decent amount about the 365-day running ROI or the 1-year running ROI. You're basically just looking at what is the return of your investment on Bitcoin had you bought it 1 year ago. And obviously, there's been a lot of discussions as to whether, it's following the 2016-2017 cycle or whether it's following what happened in 2019. I've been a big sort of proponent of it's kind of a combination of the two, right? It certainly had similar structure as the 2016-2017 cycle for a while, but kind of like what we saw in 2019, it eventually fell back down to just above 1 for a little while. So you could almost argue that it's very similar to both of the prior cycles. And it goes back to the idea that we've talked about, that every cycle is going to throw you a curveball, and this cycle is proving to be no different. Certainly from the cyclical point of view, Bitcoin followed a lot of what we saw back in 2016 and especially, really early 2017. But from the monetary policy point of view, Bitcoin did eventually get this breakdown in the running 1-year ROI, because the only way for the running 1-year ROI to have continued to stay at a 2x or continue to go up like it did in 2017 was for the price of Bitcoin to go parabolic in February and March, because we know it went parabolic last February and March of 2024. Obviously, it didn't do that. We've seen a lot of things happen because of that, right? Ethereum went home. Like we said before, right? You can't get any major shifts in monetary policy until the markets do something different, right? If they just keep on going up nonstop, why does the Fed need to pivot? They don't, and therefore QT continues and interest rates stay high. When you get pain, when you see the markets break down, that can eventually usher in much looser monetary policy. So when you look at something like the running 1-year ROI, to me, it looks like, the cycle really started off kind of just doing what it did back in the 2016-2017 cycle, structurally as well. But then as we got into the post-halving year, it started to follow more so what it was doing in 2019. And maybe the reason for that is because 2025 might be similar to 2019 through the lens of monetary policy, right? We know that the Fed ended quantitative tightening in 2019. Perhaps they will end quantitative tightening in 2025, right? I mean, it's always possible they go longer than that, but had you asked me 3 or 4 months ago, I maybe would have said longer. But given the recent drop in the markets of 20% in the stock market, it certainly opens the door for them to potentially NQT sometime in the coming months, especially if things don't improve between now and then. So here's the running 1-year ROI. Again, kind of a combination of 2016 and the 2019 cycle. You can also see that there's diminishing peaks in the running 1-year ROI, but you should also note that the peaks that mark the top are not always the peaks in the 1-year ROI. For instance, the peak in 2021 actually occurred on a lower high for the running 1-year ROI. You can see that the running 1-year ROI in March 2021 was 11x. I mean, Bitcoin went up 11x over that year, whereas the highest that it's gone this cycle is about 3.37x over the span of a single year. I was also looking at the 90-day, and interestingly enough, you can see that Bitcoin has found a lot of support around the area whenever the 90-day ROI is sitting at about a 25% loss, right? You can see that there's been plenty of times where Bitcoin sort of finds support around that level. So you could argue that whenever that breaks, it would sort of be more of a signal that the cycle is transitioning into potentially the bear market, right? And we'll probably have one in 2026, if not before then. But that is at least an interesting way to, and also, by the way, like when you look at stuff like this, you can see that there was some sort of a similar level back in the 2015, 2016 cycle, right? So once this level broke that Bitcoin's currently holding, right? But once this level broke, the cycle was more or less officially over. So that's kind of a level I've been looking at here to sort of navigate Bitcoin. Also, I mean, it's similar ideas if you were to look at like the weekly RSI of Bitcoin. Like if you go look at the let's just pull it up, but you'll kind of see something similar, right? If you look at the RSI of Bitcoin on the weekly, right, you can see this level continues to hold, and there was also sort of a similar level in 2016, 2017, and once it broke, that was the end of the cycle. And so these are pretty important levels to watch for Bitcoin because I think they kind of communicate the overall health of the market, or at least Bitcoin. You can see that other assets like Ethereum have not been able to hold, these levels, right? They actually broke down a lot more than Bitcoin did. Once again, suggesting why we spend so much time talking about Bitcoin dominance and the importance of Bitcoin dominance and preserving the Satoshi valuation of your portfolio. No one here is trying to argue that Bitcoin can't go down. We're just simply saying that if Bitcoin goes down, altcoins will likely go down more. And if Bitcoin goes up, it'll likely go up more than most altcoins. At any point in the cycle, you can always find a few altcoins that will outperform Bitcoin. But when you look back over a few years, you'll see that, Bitcoin steadily gained dominance, whereas most altcoins just kind of continued to fade. You could also look at like the year-to-date ROI of Bitcoin. Look at it in 2025 and note that it does look a lot different than what we saw in 2021. I mean, these 2 years do not remotely look the same, right? They look very different from one another. It also looks very different from 2017 and, of course, 2013 as well. In fact, I mean, if you were to average out just 2017 and 2021, then you get a chart that looks like that. And then if you add 2025 on here, I mean, you can see just how different it is. We'll probably do another video separately just talking about year-to-date ROI. But in this video, we mainly talked about the running 1-year ROI, how there's some similarities to the 2016, 2017 cyclical view, but recently there's been more similarities to the 2019 monetary policy view, which might suggest that there will likely be further changes in monetary policy, probably sometime later in as the year goes on, right, in 2025.
Meanwhile, Bitcoin has repeatedly demonstrated a powerful pattern that leads to explosive price surges, and current market conditions suggest we may be on the verge of another major breakout. Historical data reveals that when three key factors converge, low leverage in crypto markets, stronger than expected retail sales data, and hawkish signals from the Federal Reserve, Bitcoin has consistently delivered gains of 50% or more within weeks. This pattern played out dramatically in early 2024, when Bitcoin surged 84% from $37,800 to $73,500 between January and March. Similar scenarios unfolded in 2023, 50% gain, and 2021, 76% rally, each time beginning when perpetual futures funding rates were near zero, indicating minimal speculative interest. The catalyst? A combination of robust retail sales data and Federal Reserve policy signals that paradoxically sparked bullish momentum despite appearing restrictive on surface level. As analyst Benjamin Cowen often emphasizes, Bitcoin's price action is deeply intertwined with macroeconomic conditions. The current setup appears remarkably similar to these historical precedents, with Fed Chair Jerome Powell set to speak on June 18th following the central bank's rate decision and key retail sales data due June 17th. All eyes are watching for these critical indicators to align once again. While past performance doesn't guarantee future results, the consistent recurrence of this pattern suggests Bitcoin may be primed for another significant upward move. For investors, understanding these dynamics could prove valuable in navigating what may become another period of rapid price appreciation in the crypto markets. As we wrap up, do you think Bitcoin will hold its 4-year winning streak, or is this cycle different? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Share this video and hit the like button. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to like and subscribe.